And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Elliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. Joining us on the Chapters program today is Pat McGeehan, and we're going to be talking to him today about his career as a writer, his career in politics with the West Virginia legislature, and more importantly, his latest book, Stoicism in the State House, an old philosophy serving a new idea. And Pat joins us today. He's a three-term state representative with the West Virginia legislature. He's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. He's the author of Printing Our Way to Poverty, The Consequences of American Inflation, as well as the co-author of the Liberty Essays, Restoring a Lost American Principle. And Pat resides with his daughter Kennedy in Chester, West Virginia. We're glad to have him today with us on the program to talk about his new book, Stoicism in the State House. So, Pat, welcome to Chapters. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Elliot, for having me on. It's a pleasure being down here.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And I wanted to ask you first, before we get into your book, we mentioned that you are a multi-year serving legislator in the West Virginia legislature. How did you get into politics, and what got you interested in wanting to serve in the legislature?
Yeah, I never thought when I was younger I was going to end up being a politician. In my family that sort of had a bad connotation to it, so it's kind of humorous. But I grew up in a military family. My dad was an Air Force bomber pilot, and so we moved around when I was young from base to base, all over the world, really. But my hometown was Chester, West Virginia. Both sides of my family grew up in the northern panhandle, and I didn't really have a home per se, growing up as an Air Force or military brat. I would always consider West by God, Virginia, my home. So my father actually was tragically killed in the line of duty in an aircraft accident. His bomber went down when I was 14, almost 15, and so that's when my mother and I and my two younger brothers moved back to West Virginia permanently, and I went to high school at Oak Glen High School, the Golden Bears, up in the northern panhandle, and Chester, which is also, by the way, I know you guys are down here in Huntington, but Chester is home of the world's largest teapot, so you guys got to come up and see it. So moved home, and anyway, I was fortunate enough to gain an appointment to the U.S. Air Force Academy, and that's where I went to college and did my 4 years in Colorado Springs. Served afterwards on active duty as an intelligence officer, and did tour overseas, did a little time in the Middle East, a little time in Afghanistan. Got out, but moved back home to West Virginia, and I just saw that there was a lot of corruption in local politics, and a lot of give and takes, quid pro quo deals, and I was relatively young at the time. This is back in 2008, 2009, and I decided to run for the House of Delegates, the lower branch in the state legislature at that time, and was successful. Had a little big success there. Was elected, and that's sort of how I got into it. And I just, I've always loved my hometown. I've always loved West Virginia, and that's really sort of how I got into politics.
So, having served in the legislature for a number of years now, what is something you wish the public knew about the legislature that maybe they don't know? I mean, we read excerpts of what goes on in the legislature, but you guys do a lot of things behind the scenes, I think, that oftentimes don't get covered. So what's something you wish the public knew, or thinks the public should know about either you as a legislator or the legislature in general, maybe that they don't know?
I would say in general, the public needs to know more about all of the inside deals that take place behind closed doors. There's a lot of times where there will be important policies up for a vote, and some of these policies already have a predetermined outcome or a predetermined vote because of different vote swapping and deal making that is already taking place behind the scenes without the public's awareness. And so sometimes when we go out onto the House floor and say, I'm speaking against a bill, there's a lot of people that have already committed to vote one way or the other because they've been promised different things. And that's sort of the disgusting, corrupt part of politics that I think some people are probably suspicious of that takes place, but I'm here to say and confirm that it definitely takes place, and probably on a much wider scale than what people even expect or would imagine. And it's unfortunate, and it's really blatant anymore, and I think dishonorable.
I think that's an excellent point, and I appreciate you being open and candid about that, because I think you address a lot of the concerns people have when they think about not just state politicians, but carrying that over into national politics as well.
Sure.
So I wanted to ask you about your book, Stoicism in the State House. I found this just fascinating because it ties into so many of the classical leaders and so many of the classical philosophers and leaders of ancient Roman times. But when we talk about Stoicism as a concept, what is that exactly when we think about Stoicism?
So, of course, the adjective stoic used in the colloquial sense in the English language would probably just mean someone that doesn't show emotion or a very poker face, that kind of thing. But Stoicism, the philosophy, is an ancient philosophy. It's one of the so-called Greek splinter schools of the Hellenistic Greek philosophy period. So Stoicism is an ancient Greek philosophy that was developed around 300 BC or thereabouts, and it is really a philosophy that focuses on rationality. And some of the great Stoic philosophers from the early Stoic period summarize the formula that a man should live by or a woman should live by to achieve the good life, as the Greek philosophers always talked about the good life, or the life of virtue. Virtue is in itself, from Socrates. They basically stated that the recipe is to live according to nature. Now, the Stoics, when they use the term nature, they didn't mean it as we would use it today in English. When we talk about something that's natural or nature, we're really talking about the origin of the thing. The Stoics, when they talk about live according to nature, for instance, they're talking about a thing's end. Its natural state of flourishment, or its highest state of flourishment, or its highest state of perfection. And for man, that is rationality, because we as humans, that's what sort of separates us from the beasts, is our ability to reason. So when they say live according to nature, what that really means is live a rational life, live a reasonable life, live according to reason. And they equated reason also with virtuous progress. So essentially what the Stoics advocated for was one fundamental principle that kind of guided their way of thinking, and that was it's called the dichotomy of control. And that is basically to only focus on what you have direct control over, and to dismiss and try to ignore anything beyond your control. And if you can do that, along with other Stoic practices that some of the great Stoic philosophers talked about, you can come to sort of a peace of mind, a sort of a tranquility of mind, knowing that you are always pursuing virtue and doing the right thing, and you can be content knowing that you are following the right path and you are doing everything within your control to pursue that path of virtue, regardless of what others may say about you or do to you.
There's one philosopher that kind of takes center stage in your book, and that is Cato. Cato is a senator who in ancient Roman times, after 20 years of being sort of standing against some of the corruption, courageous leadership, and of course Rome was going through some civil wars during that period, he made the ultimate sacrifice. He committed suicide rather than submitting to Caesar's rule. And I did a little research on that story. I'd forgotten about that story from history, but it's interesting how I think sometimes we look at Stoicism, and we look at Stoicism from our leaders and look at that as sort of a passive or sort of a blah, like non-reactive position. But it seems like that if we look at our politics today, it's making a little bit of a comeback. I know in Ben Sass's book, he wrote a little bit about Stoicism, his book that just came out. So what's one of the reasons, why do we see Stoicism kind of making a comeback a little bit on the political scene, do you think, having worked in politics and written about this and studied this?
Well, I don't think that there's a massive resurgence in the Stoic philosophy, but I do think there are some people that are writing maybe about Stoicism, not quite about Stoicism, because there's a lot of self-help books that are taking place and that are transpiring across the country and internationally, and so there are some people that are possibly just focusing on Stoicism to make a quick buck, and they're really watering down the message, so to speak, and some of these people are disingenuous, and they're also writing about not just Stoicism, but like Buddhism and Epicureanism and hedonism and things of that nature, and they're mixing and being very eclectic with the philosophy. My book, and I was unaware of any of these other people writing about the Stoic philosophy actually until after I finished the book and was asked to do a bunch of interviews. So.
Very, very good. Cato, we talked about him a moment ago, so sort of his backstory, but he's really an interesting figure. Other than what he did, sort of committing suicide to kind of resist Caesar's rule as a sort of an ultimate act of defiance, what is it about him that intrigues you, and can we, as a democracy, or as people serving on our behalf, as politicians that we elect, serving on our behalf in a democracy, what can we learn from him?
Well, I think Cato, we can learn so much, I think, from his life, and unfortunately, he has sort of been lost to the ages over the last century or so. If you walk into a bookstore, you will probably find dozens of biographies on Julius Caesar, praising Caesar and how much vision Julius Caesar had, and he saved Rome and built the empire.